Good morning. It is a good morning. It's Friday, September 6th. Hope everybody's doing all right, feeling all right this morning. I had a lovely time of worship with my wife first thing this morning. We went long. We enjoyed praying together. And so I hope you've started your morning off with prayer too. It's the best way to start your day, especially as a believer. And this is how we should be doing all of our lives together. Constant prayer with the Father. Amen. Let's see. I'm just making sure that everything's up and running. I think everybody's having a slow start to their Friday. I got a fly in here with me, so I'm going to be going nuts per usual. We are today covering petitions 78 through 85. That's 8 pages. And then I think next week I'm going to take requests just on the petitions that y'all think are most important rather than going through this minutia. Because, a lot of these, it's all worthy, otherwise it wouldn't come before the floor of the General Conference. But there are some more big picture ones that perhaps are more worthy. I've had a couple people writing me about the TLC petitions in particular. It seems like there's a lot of concern for getting their slate of petitions adopted, and the overall concern I've already stated is that there's only 1 week for this whole gathering, and so much of the time has been slated for worship and for edification and for mission, and it remains to be seen. I think they have released the schedule. I haven't looked at it yet. Surely there is not much time for deliberating on legislation, and I know that they're already very concerned about wasting a lot of time on the floor with amendments and back and forth. So it's worth going ahead and praying that we use the time well, and that helpful amendments are proposed and not kind of nickel and dimed. So good morning, Tim. Good to see you, brother. So what I'm wanting to see is simple amendments aimed at transparency and accountability. And it from my brother Pat this morning, it was becoming clear that there are a couple simple amendments that can be made to the paragraphs on the jobs and duties of the Connectional Council and also the Assembly of Bishops that will guarantee a certain degree of accountability. So here in another week or two, I'll be submitting for the consideration of the delegates language suggested for amendments from the floor, which will hopefully result in just measures in place to make sure. Hey, Lisa, I'm realizing that somehow this got moved over. Let me see. There we go. Yeah, hopefully there are a couple simple things that can be done to add to transparency and accountability, so that as trust is earned and given to the leadership of the GMC, that these things can be maintained for the good of the body. So if there's nothing else to be said, good morning, Clayton. Good to see you, brother. If there's nothing else to say, and of course, all along the way this morning, y'all can write comments. I like to call your comments up on screen and engage the people who are with me in this time. If you're watching later in the day, you should consider coming in when I'm live so that you can be part of the conversation. We always begin with a prayer. Today, like I said, oh man, it did this again. Today's the 6th, so we have day 31. And I read this prayer. I think it's a wise prayer to say. Merciful God, grant the IT people, as well as the Technology and Communications Committee at the Convening General Conference, your favor. We pray that things work right, that technology is a help, not an obstacle. Amen. As one who works with tech stuff, this is a very worthy prayer. No matter how good you get at it, there's always hiccups. So it's good to pray about this. Good morning, Ben. Good to see you, brother. So let's go to our We're on petition 78. We're still in a batch of petitions from the, no, this is from the TLC. Are we done with the Trinity Conference ones? Well, no, the last one was from the TLC. What about the previous one? This was completely lost on me yesterday. Okay, so the TLC's petitions, we've already been processing. This one is for the episcopacy and superintendency. So the previous two also dealt with episcopacy, like what to do with bishops, like how to replace them whenever, we're only going to be meeting every 6 years. So what do we do in the in-between times if a bishop has to bow out? So if you haven't read over that with us, yesterday for some reason the feed cut, so we had 2 different segments, but you can navigate that through those pretty easy. Today we're on petition 78, status of bishops emeriti. And so the rationale is this new paragraph addresses the role and status of bishops emeriti. Paragraph 513.1, bishops may choose senior status upon approval of, that's retired, not really retired, you never really retire from ministry, but like senior status is as defined. I'm thinking, well, anyway, let's just abbreviate for now because I'm not remembering the particulars. But when you're no longer actively appointed to a charge, but you've done your time, earned your status, I still think you don't get a vote, but you maintain a voice at conference stuff. Upon approval of a majority of the General Conference on Episcopacy, elders who formerly served as bishops but are not actively serving as bishops may use the title of Bishop Emeritus, but they will not retain their episcopal responsibilities or membership on the Assembly of Bishops unless they have been assigned by the General Conference on Episcopacy to serve as in an interim capacity due to a need. So that was one of the previous petitions from yesterday that we covered. If there's an open spot, if somebody has to step down from the episcopacy, they can call on a bishop emeritus to fill that role. So that's the only circumstance in which a bishop emeritus is restored to a place on the Assembly of Bishops. Point 2, a bishop's emeriti may assist active bishops at their request, but shall not be remunerated for their work except for expenses. Okay, so they can't receive pay, they can only receive compensation. It's just bishops emeriti. This is not active bishops. 3, a bishop emeritus shall be a clergy member of the annual conference of their choice and may serve in any capacity allowed for senior clergy, which I think would be common sense. So what's happening in the Global Methodist Church, for those who, this is hard for me, my brain doesn't cover all the things well, but we have to keep in mind that we're trying to create a theology of ordination. It's different from the United Methodist Church. It's also different from the historic church, and Ryan Denker has written on this. There are some defining characteristics of the Global Methodist understanding of the episcopacy. They haven't been set in stone yet, but what's being presented by the TLC is bishops are not a separate ordained category. There's only deacons and elders. These are the only 2 ordained categories. And then bishops are just a functional role temporarily on the part of some elders to serve in a higher capacity. And so the thing, historically, bishops have not been seen in that way. They've been a 3rd category of ordained clergy that maintains their status in perpetuity unless they're defrocked. In the GMC, you have, first off, you can't be an elder unless you're a deacon for 2 years, unless you've been inducted in already. But the general structure is you have to be a deacon first, and only then can you become an elder after 2 years. And you're not entitled to this. You still have to go through a process. But then also unique is once you're a bishop, you step down from being a bishop. You're given a title, Bishop Emeritus, and you're eligible for serving in a higher role again if you want. But you can only serve 2 6-year terms, and then you're out. So as long as you're on board with that new theology around the episcopacy, there should be no problem with Petition 78. This should not be a scandalous thing. But if you do see it as a problem that we don't have a 3rd category ordained clergy, and that we have people stepping in and out of the episcopacy role in this way, then you would not like this one. So with me, as I've said before, I really don't care. Maybe I should. The Bible does talk about bishops, but it does so in a way that's kind of confusing, whether or not it's synonymous with the elders, the order of elders. And so I've just not seen this as an issue worth dividing over. My concern is that, I'll say it again, my concern is with the culture, not with the structure. So let's go on to Petition 79 after I look at comments. Oh, Matt Jordan, welcome. And Evie, good morning, sister. All right, let's look at Petition 79. This is from the TLC. The rationale is this paragraph addresses the process by which bishops are granted various types of leave. So this kind of gets nitty gritty, but it's, remember, the devil's in the details, and it's good to have a structure in place that we all know, so that whenever times of uncertainty come, we know what needs to happen. Point 1, leaves of absence. A bishop may be granted a leave of absence for a justifiable reason for not more than 6 months by the General Committee on Episcopacy. During the period for which the leave is granted, the bishop shall be released from all episcopal responsibilities, and an interim plan of episcopal coverage shall be approved and published by the General Committee on Episcopacy in consultation with the Assembly of Bishops. I'm just curious if it'll be published in an arena that all people can see. Even so, yeah, there's going to be a plan. Somebody can't just step out, and I don't know what's going to happen. The Committee on Episcopacy is responsible for coverage. Point 2, medical leave. Bishops who by reason of impaired health are temporarily unavailable to perform full work may be granted a leave of absence for not more than 6 months by the General Committee on Episcopacy. During the period for which the leave is granted, the bishop shall be released from all episcopal responsibilities, and an interim plan of episcopal coverage shall be approved and published by the General Committee on Episcopacy in consultation with the Assembly of Bishops. So this time, no. The previous, they have that language as well. If after the 6-month period the bishop is still unable to perform full work due to impaired health, the leave may be extended by the committee in 1-month increments for an additional 6 months, or the bishop may apply for disability. Okay, so that, to my mind, covers everything. And it's good to have a plan. If there's a reason why this plan is not fair, then I'm not seeing it yet. So, yeah, Petition 79 should be easy. Regardless of what episcopal plan is adopted, it just seems like, yeah, we have to have provision for them to step down or step out for a small amount of time and know how to function if they have to do so. So this doesn't seem like a problem to me. Petition 80. This is the TLC, and it goes to the Judicial Administration Committee. This deals with complaints against bishops. The rationale is this new paragraph addresses the process for filing a complaint against a bishop and its initial handling. For those who are not aware of the current system, TJ and I started going through the Judicial Policy and Procedure document, which outlines the very nitty-gritty of all this procedure, but this would be a petition to establish a new thing that may or may not correspond much with the JPP document. So this is 3 points. Point 1, episcopal leadership in the GMC shares with all other ordained persons in the sacred trust of their ordination. Whenever a bishop violates this trust or is unable to fulfill appropriate responsibilities, continuation in the episcopal office shall be subject to review. This review shall have as its primary purpose a just resolution of any violations of sacred trust, in hope that God's work of justice, reconciliation, and healing may be realized. So if you've seen the judicial stuff that TJ and I have done, you know that I'm generally not in favor of just resolution. I saw that abused all the time in the United Methodist Church. I think once things get to the level of a complaint, then there needs to be action from above to say, here's what needs to happen, otherwise you're out. So the kind of lighter touch just resolution, I think, is more often than not used by conflict avoidant people to seek some kind of compromise rather than justice. Point 2, any complaint concerning the effectiveness, competence, or one or more offenses listed on in the Book of Doctrines and Disciplines shall be submitted to the chair of the General Committee on Episcopacy. A complaint is a written statement claiming misconduct, unsatisfactory performance of ministerial duties, or one or more of the listed offenses. So you got this written complaint that is specific in what the bishop has done wrong or failed to do right, and it shall be submitted to the chair of the General Committee on Episcopacy. So not to another bishop, not to your presiding elder. If there's a complaint against a bishop, it goes right to the chair of the General Committee on Episcopacy. That's the committee responsible for all the bishops of the GMC. Point 3, complaints not involving abuse may be referred to the Assembly of Bishops for a plan of resolution. Such a plan of resolution must be approved by the General Committee on Episcopacy. Otherwise, the complaint shall be administered according to the provisions of Part 8, Judicial Administration. Any involuntary status change of a bishop must be recommended by a 3/4 vote of the investigative committee and approved by the General Committee on Episcopacy by a 2/3 vote. This is outlined in Judicial Practice and Procedure Rules of the GMC, page 3, with the exception that a penalty following trial shall not require such a recommendation and approval and shall be implemented immediately, subject to any appeal. This one's more complicated. So, and here's the part, if you saw my interview with Jay Thurl, he called this foxes guarding the hen house, whenever there is a complaint not involving abuse. So if it involves abuse, then the General Committee on Episcopacy immediately acts on it, and there's swift action, ideally. But if it doesn't involve abuse, then it gets kicked over to the Assembly of Bishops, and they'll come up with a plan for how to provide remedial action that has to be approved by the Committee on the Episcopacy. And ostensibly, if they don't approve it, then it goes back to the Assembly of Bishops. 3/4 vote of the investigative committee is required to involuntarily change the status of a bishop. So if a bishop is active and he or she wants to remain active, but they're guilty of misconduct and they're going to be removed from their position, then you have to have at least 3/4 vote on the investigative committee. It's been a minute since I've read these documents, but the investigative committee is composed of bishops are not on it. So I guess I wouldn't agree with the characterization that this is foxes guarding the hen house. Although I guess I just don't see the purpose of kicking it over to the Assembly of Bishops for anything anyway. I get that the hope is that they'll be collegial and hold each other accountable, but I just, coming out of the UMC, it doesn't seem very realistic that they'll do that, especially if they have an established relationship of trust and brotherly affection. Feels like it'd be much more appropriately done by a body outside of that body. So I guess I'm not as much in favor of Petition 80 for that reason. If they could augment it so that the Committee on Episcopacy, General Committee on Episcopacy, handles all of that outright, regardless of whether or not it's an allegation of abuse, I just think that'd be better. I also kind of wish that there were language here about a timetable, like from when the complaint is received to when resolution or judgment is rendered. I think that is in the Judicial Practice and Procedure document. And so, yeah, I'm not sure that anything in this actually contradicts what's in the JPP document. I wonder the process of amending the JPP document. I don't think that's in the purview of the General Conference, although maybe it will be in 2026. But yeah, Petition 80, I guess I would have either augmented or voted down. There's just no reason to have the Assembly of Bishops responsible for that. I think that's a big enough issue to kind of trip this thing up. Let's see. Good morning, Earl. Good to see you, brother. All right, let's go on to the next petition. That would be Petition 81. This is on interim bishops, and it looks like it eliminates a good deal of language. This is from the TLC for the Episcopacy Committee. So I think they had language they suggested a few petitions ago on transferring bishops. Yep, that was Petition 76. So they had a preferred method of doing that, and now This is 81, where they get rid of the previous language. And so if I was real nerdy, I would read this and figure out the difference between what they had done and what they're suggesting now. And I probably should care about that, but I don't. Well, and it has a lot of language in here that's, Transitional Leadership Council is now the Connectional Council. So how much of it is just change in terminology and how much of it is substantially different? That's for the Episcopacy Committee to determine. I don't really want to do that today. Let's go on to Petition 82. This is deleting the vacancy in the office of bishop. This petition deletes a paragraph in favor of the new proposed paragraph 512 addressed in another petition. So what's deleted is a vacancy in the office of bishop may occur due to death, transition to senior status, resignation, administrative or judicial procedure, leave of absence, or medical leave. In case the assignment of bishop to residential supervision of an episcopal area is terminated by any of the above causes or no bishop is assigned to provide residential supervision, the vacancy shall be filled by, well, it won't be the TLC anymore, from among active bishops, bishops emeriti, or by the appointment of a president pro tempore. A president pro tempore is an elder given responsibility for Okay, so we've already dealt. So this is vacancy in the. We've already dealt with this in some other. So it's just a more distinct, detailed process has been laid out, and we've talked about those petitions. So we can go on. Petition 83, status of senior bishops. Okay, so we've already read that petition today as well. This is deleting the previous model under the TLC. Same exact thing. So let's go on to petition 84. This is submitted by the Trinity Conference. All right, we're going back to them. And it has to do with finance, administration, pension, and benefits. So we already saw a petition from them that we covered yesterday that gives rights over finance and administration to annual conferences rather than deferring to the general conference for all things. Annual conferences would be given rights to oversee their own finances in some particular ways that the general church doesn't necessarily want at this point. It has a lot to do with pensions and health benefits, especially the health benefits part. And we can talk about that a little bit more. I assume that's what's coming. Here's the rationale. 1, duties should be limited to what is listed in this paragraph. 2, this commission's oversight of pension and benefits programs should be limited to the programs utilized by the general church staff. And 3, annual conferences should have the authority to determine the best pension and health benefit programs for their clergy and churches. Okay, so we're going to be dealing with both general church and annual conference level pension and benefits. One of the things, Matt Conover, he was here with us yesterday, and he was saying that if a lot of this stuff gets kicked down to the annual conference level, then we are not practically going to be able to have any kind of shared health insurance program. Annual conferences are not large enough to negotiate with health providers in that way. Good morning, Nina. Glad you're with us this morning. And I trust that Matt knows what he's talking about, but also I guess, well, I can talk more about it in a minute. Let's look at the actual petition and then see what conversation comes. So paragraph 705 right now says potential transitional. They get rid of the transitional stuff. It's just connectional commissions. The following connectional commissions shall be formed to deal with these tasks or areas of ministry. It's hard when you have underlines and then strike throughs and you're trying to figure out what stands and what doesn't. So far the language is just making it current and permanent. So point 5, they skip the first 4 points. Now we deal with finance, administration, pensions, and benefits. So they get rid of that phrase, including but not limited to, which I'm a big fan of. I'm a big fan of getting rid of these big catch-all things that allow for all kinds of spread and drift. So here's what it says. Duties include overseeing the financial and fiduciary life of the general church to ensure both its integrity and efficiency, reporting publicly the detailed expenses and income. I like the publicly. Good. And that was already there. Conducting an annual independent audit, collecting and distributing all income received by the general church, managing the legal work of the general church, giving oversight to the pension and benefits, i.e. health insurance and disability, etc., programs for clergy and lay employees, for those employed by or appointed to the general church. That's the important thing. So not all employees of the GMC, but just those that work for the general church. Not local churches, not annual conference staffs, general church. And ensuring, not encouraging, ensuring annual conferences worldwide make adequate provision for pension and healthcare benefits for clergy and laity who serve actively or serve in a senior or retired status in the church. So they are not responsible for getting a plan for the whole general church, all levels of the church. Rather, they're responsible for providing for their own direct employees at the general church level and for making sure that everybody at every other level has adequate coverage. Not that they are providing the coverage, but they're just making sure that they do their due diligence at getting coverage for their people. Oh, and that's the whole thing. Okay, so it eliminates language that indicates that they can make decisions for the whole church, and it stipulates that they only have direct supervision and provision for general church employees. Okay, so the reason that this matters is there are a lot of people who are noticing that the Guidestone health insurance program is prohibitively expensive for some churches that don't have a lot of money. And so the current stipulation is that all full-time clergy of Global Methodist churches have to have health insurance through Guidestone, which the minimum plan is $10,500, which if you have a church with an annual budget of $70,000, which those churches do exist, then that is a huge deal, and that's paying on top of the pastor's pay, which we don't have official minimum standards, but we have common decency. This is prohibitively expensive for some churches. So this is going to mean that if we stick with Guidestone and everybody's compelled into this program, there are a lot of churches that are not going to last more than 5 more years. And for some people, they go, yeah, if they can't fund this healthcare program, they probably shouldn't be operating. I'm not one of those. I'm of the mind that there are many small and poor churches that have vital roles and need to be maintained, and they need to operate in a different economic structure. There are some larger, more abundantly wealthy churches that can operate like businesses in a modern healthcare marketplace. I think there are others that have to work out other arrangements, using something more like Samaritan Ministries, which is healthcare sharing ministry, or going on the marketplace for other health insurance options. As I said yesterday, I think there are also people that just have chronic illness that even though they love preaching, it really shouldn't be a full-time gig for them. It should be an occasional thing, but they should either be on disability through the government, or they should be working another full-time job that actually can supply that, and then they preach on the side. But I don't think it's the Global Methodist Church's responsibility to make sure that any and all persons can preach as a career. I don't think that that's the obligation of the church. So I see a biblical concern for not being a burden on the church. I'm talking about language in 1st and 2nd Timothy. And so I think that those who want to teach and preach are obligated to maintain good health and then provide for their own health in ways. And then I do think, Duncan Williams was pushing back on me yesterday saying we should at least have options of health care for just freak accidents and immediate dramatic stuff that needs to happen. And of course, that's just fine if the GMC establishes a special fund for that. But making everyone mandatorily pay into that just seems unsustainable if we're going to maintain small, poor churches. And I, for one, I know that there is a cultural tug of war going on in the GMC around, are we going to show preference towards urban and suburban upper middle class churches, as has been the case in the United Methodist Church, or are we going to show special care and provision for lower income and smaller and rural churches? And I'm hoping that we don't show bias towards one or the other, but we have equal regard, in a sense, for I believe every church has a lampstand in God's presence in some way. And so to show preference for churches based on how much money they have or how many people they have or how much expense, additional money they have just seems wrong to me. And I don't think I'm probably the only one. Let's look at what the smart people have to say. Oh, it's all Matt. I'm glad you're here, Matt. He says this one restricts the pension and benefits, the Council of Finance and Administration pension benefits for the general church to be over only the benefits of the general church employees. Yeah. How can they insure when they're not responsible? Yeah, that's an interesting question. So if you're not responsible, how can you insure it? So what I would imagine here is like, okay, my presiding elder is technically responsible for all of the churches in his district, circuit, whatever. I'm the one primarily responsible for maintaining the membership, but if it becomes clear that I'm not maintaining the membership, it's a prerogative of my presiding elder to say, Jeffrey, you're not doing your job. You need to do your job or I'm going to put someone else in your place. So a supervisory role. That's kind of how I read this, is like this committee is looking at each annual conference and making sure that they are making provision. And if they aren't, then saying, okay, we're going to have to intervene in some sense. He says, note that it is nearly impossible to provide a group insurance plan for only 8 to 10 employees for a reasonable cost. He says 8 to 10 employees at the general church level, I think. So, okay, so if we're talking about the general church level, how many employees are there at the general church level? If there's 8 to 10, even if there's 20, can you really provide a good plan with them? That's a worthy question. Because remember, we're going to have a lean, mean structure, and then a lot of people on the general boards and agencies are not going to be paid. These are going to be volunteer positions. So are they going to be able to have a reasonable plan, or are they going to have to pay out the nose? But also when we're looking at annual conference staffs, are they going to have the same plan as all the clergy in their annual conference? These are worthy questions. Yeah, and Matt, when you spoke of not being sustainable, are there some small churches that are not sustainable? So the churches I'm concerned with are, well, okay, and D says, the 3 churches in my charge cannot afford any of this, but I don't wish for clergy to be without health care. This is a very difficult topic. And Matt agrees, these are very hard questions. So there are a lot of churches, I think, that are sustainable if they are allowed to pay either a health stipend that's smaller than the mandatory health insurance cost, and there are pastors that may be willing to negotiate on that, or if they don't have to incur any of that cost at all. If you remove the health insurance, I mean, nobody wants pastors to go without health insurance, but in the end, I think it's for a church and for a clergy to negotiate these things. And if there is a clergy who just has to preach, but the only place they can preach is a church that can't afford to pay them health benefits, although they can pay a reasonable salary, I think it should be the right of the church and the clergy to make that arrangement. The tradition we come out of in the United Methodist Church says we are not going to provide for any pastoral settings that don't meet minimum standards. And though I understand the intent there is to guarantee that all of our clergy are well cared for, I'm not sure that that is... I mean, I'll just speak for myself. I don't think that should be on the denomination to guarantee. I think in the end, it's for me and my family to decide what we need and what we don't, and where we can and cannot serve. And it's great for the GMC to have standards that they're shooting for, but to say straight up, we're not going to have any of these alternative scenarios in the GMC, I think unnecessarily limits and hamstrings and potentially kills a number of smaller churches that otherwise would be able to sustain. And I know there are a lot of people who have the mind, if you're not growing, you're dying. And if you're just barely getting by, that's no way for a church to be. Let's just go ahead and close these. Let's put them out of their misery. And I just don't share in that theology. I think there, in a lot of these small rural settings, these places are more rightly seen as like mission outposts in a hostile environment. And if you give up a mission outpost, then you've given up on a mission field. So I am hopeful that the GMC does start to look at rural ministry more as mission work, and start empowering and training clergy to go out into the mission field and start pushing back against the gates of hell in ways that the UMC hasn't done well. I know I need that help, but to give up on these mission fields and focus only on the places that are rich and big enough to sustain upper middle class clergy, I think would be a real mistake, especially when the roots of Methodism are lower income, blue collar, and a lot of our clergy in the beginning were not supported well, and they did it out of love of God and love of man rather than desire of comfort. So I know these are hard things, but I still think just because something's hard doesn't mean that there's not a place that we all should rest in the end. That's why it's not. I've had it backwards the whole time. Sorry. All right. So good morning, Pat. Matt says there is an issue of the ability to be appointed across conferences. If we keep the benefits consistent, we are putting out a level playing field. That's true, but in Matt, we're going to see about just bringing you on camera whenever we're talking about financial stuff, because I think it's better for you to be able to talk directly to me rather than you type, I talk. I think this is not symmetrical. But when we're talking about different bishops need to get paid different amounts based on what conference they live in, what the cost of living is. It seems to me that to have regional differences in this stuff is already baked into the pattern. And are we going to allow that to impact elders and deacons as well, or is it going to be only bishops whose salaries are negotiated based on where they live? Well, and we're already going to have that with elders based on what local churches pay outside of health benefits, but for some reason we're trying to equalize this around the connection. I'm not saying for some reason. There are obvious reasons why, but when considering sustainability, when considering, there are already ways in which we've extended more rights to local churches to make their own decisions. It seems to me that we should at least have the conversation of whether or not health insurance should be one of those places where individual churches or collectives of churches should be able to negotiate these things separately from the denomination as a whole. D says, my 3 churches are not really sustainable at the UMC level of pay and benefits. That's what's causing us to have to consider closing right now. If we close, then other 2 churches will hurt more, so they will be next. Very difficult position for us trying to discern what to do right now. Yeah. I love when Matt thinks I'm not stupid. Matt, thank you so much, brother. Yeah, so D, I think there are a ton of churches in your position right now, and there are hard decisions that have to be made, and sometimes consolidation or closing is on the table. Other times, there are other options that can be entertained if everybody can live with less comfort. So God bless you and your church as you deal with that. Let's try and tackle another petition. So we were on petition 84, now we're on 85. So this deletes language on leaves. It deletes paragraph 519 in favor of a new paragraph 514, which we already covered, I think. Yeah, we already did, when bishops can request a leave of absence and medical leave. So, yeah, this has the TLC in there, and maybe some of the stuff changes, but the Episcopacy Committee can be concerned about that. Petition 86, Nominations and Leadership Committee. This is a 2-page petition. This is written by the Trinity Conference. It's for the conference's committee. So the rationale is 3 points. 1, since the leadership committee primarily makes nominations, it is best to have word nominations in the title. This change to paragraph 612.4 will then be reflected throughout the Book of Doctrines and Discipline. 2, the proposed paragraph 507.1.m states the conference superintendent is the chair of the leadership team, not the bishop. And 3, it is unreasonable to have all presiding elders serve on the Nominations and Leadership Committee, especially in conferences with numerous presiding elders. 1 presiding elder is more reasonable. So Trinity Conference has been good about creating realistic expectations for presiding elders, many of whom are volunteer and on top of doing full-time jobs like mine. So we'll get into the nitty gritty of this, but it looks like they have limited the responsibilities of presiding elders here. Paragraph 612, annual conference boards and committees. Annual conferences shall create the following boards and committees. And so there are 3 that it skips over, and then 4 will be the nominations and leadership committee. So in the version that we've got right now, it's just called the leadership committee. This makes clear in the title they're responsible for nominations. The nominations and leadership committee shall be responsible for nominating clergy and laity to serve on annual conference committees and boards. Members shall be nominated by the conference superintendent, not the bishop. So I don't think they're making a big change here. I would imagine that the previous language is from the unclear picture of what the bishop does and what his or her responsibility jurisdiction is. So this makes it clear it's the conference superintendent. That's the primary temporal governing entity in each annual conference. 1 per conference unless special arrangements are made. Members shall be nominated by the conference superintendent and elected by the annual conference. So there's just 1 person nominating people for this committee, the nominations and leadership committee. The committee shall include equal numbers of clergy and laity. The annual conference shall set the number of members of the committee. All this is language that's already in place. Members shall serve 6 years and may not succeed themselves. Okay, so you can't have 2 terms. The conference superintendent and 1 presiding elder, chosen by the conference superintendent, shall also serve on the committee with voice and vote in addition to the clergy and laity elected by the annual conference. So I'm already against this, and it's not that I think they have bad intentions. I think the intention is to remove the burden from presiding elders. But here's the thing: if you don't have equal representation from all the presiding elders, the main laity and clergy that are going to be able to be spoken to are just from 1 presiding elder's area. There's no reason why they would know about good leadership throughout the rest of their connections. So for the sake of equal representation, it seems like this is pretty unworkable. Maybe there's something written further down that'll change my mind. B, if a member of the committee cannot serve for any reason, the conference superintendent shall appoint an interim member to serve the remainder of the unused term. The annual conference shall confirm the interim appointment at its next meeting. So remember, these serve 6-year terms. So but the annual conference gathers annually. This is not the general conference level. So if they have their annual conference in June and in December one has to step down, the conference superintendent can put somebody new in at that point without the approval of the annual conference, but at the following annual conference, that next June or July or whenever, they have to approve that temporary appointment to become permanent to fill the rest of the 6-year period. The conference superintendent shall serve as the chair of the committee. This is point C. The committee shall elect from its members a vice chair, secretary, and any officers it deems necessary. Election shall be by simple majority and shall be for a term of years to be determined by the annual conference. Okay, I might rescind my corrective because I was imagining that this would just be the conference superintendent and only 1 presiding elder, but that's not what it's actually proposing here. Does it say how many members are on the committee? I don't think so. It just says equal numbers of clergy and laity. So ostensibly, there could be people from all the districts on there. It's just there would be only 1 presiding elder, and then there would be other elders. Yeah, say it's a committee of 12. There would be 1 presiding elder, and then 5 other elders from different districts, and then you would have laity to balance them out from those different districts. So, okay, I don't have the problem that I had before. I think I'm going to rescind my correction or concern. All right, and then the name change will affect these other places, and then they're just adding the change in the name of the committee in these other places. So, okay, this has been Petition 86. I did have a problem with only 1 presiding elder. I guess I still think it would be good to at least give the presiding elders a position on that board. But if they can't realistically participate, then laity outnumber clergy every time. So yeah, I guess I don't know. live and let live on this one. It would not be. I like the name change, but even if you don't change the name, the function remains the same. So, but it is good to have names that reflect the duties of these different boards. I think I like Petition 86. If you don't, we're still friends. But I think Petition 86 would be good. Let's look at comments, and then we'll see if we have time for one more. Bob Riley says, what is financially realistic and what is desired from a serving the people is many times different on the lower funding end of the range of churches. Yeah. So there is a saying of wisdom. It's not in the Bible. Do not let the perfect become the enemy of the good. And I think we have to have that distinction of, okay, there's the perfect ideal thing, and then there's making do with the reality that we've got. And as I hopefully showed, all this comes down to theology. And if we have a certain polity that makes it less realistic for small, poor, rural churches to stay open, then we need to reflect upon that very seriously. Understanding it might actually have bad implications across the connection, or unfavorable or inconvenient. A lot of this is cost-benefit analysis, but a lot of it is theological. And if we're making decisions that hurt the poor, then we need to see that for what it is and do that with eyes wide open. Matt says, if all presiding elders serve on the committee, that increases the committee by 20 people in Mid-South. Then you would need to find a minimum of 20 other laity. That's a minimum of 40 people on this committee. Ugh, that's a big committee. So yeah, I didn't even think about, okay, how many circuits or districts are there? How many presiding elders are there? So yeah, you entitle all of them, and then you have to balance it out with laity. That seems like a problem, but if the concern is getting an even spread and representation from all the districts, then yeah, it seems like you have to have a committee this big. But yeah, that's definitely a worthy consideration here as well, and an obvious one. Not a fan of 86. So yeah, for that reason, that makes sense. D says, sorry I get us in the weeds about the local church stuff. I'm beside myself with grief over my church closing. I don't think this is something to apologize for. I think the local church has to be if we agree that it's a primary place where disciples are made, then it should be a primary concern as we go through these things. And it's great to be aware of churches that are doing well and thriving, but it's also important for us to be mindful of churches that aren't. And I think a lot of voices in leadership kind of like to ignore that, act like it's not an issue, or act like, oh, there's something wrong with these places. And I would like to do my part to undo that tone where you're just kind of swept under the rug and ignored. So let's look at Petition 87. Paragraph 520 is deleted, and it deals with complaints against bishops. This was submitted by the TLC, and we just read over the plan for how it would work. And so people who are interested can do that, compare and contrast on your own. Petition 88, this will be the last one for today. It's a 2-page document. It deals with responsibilities of presiding elders. And so this is from the Trinity Conference delegation that has a mind towards making the load lighter on them. The rationale. I just realized I misspoke. Matt said he wasn't a fan of 86, even though it does not. So Petition 86 would not participate in this big bloated organization because it would not mandate that all the presiding elders are on there. So Matt, I might have misunderstood why you didn't like it. So anyway, sorry to those of you. I might have muddied the waters unintentionally, of course. All right, so coming back to Petition 88, the rationale here is this proposal modifies paragraph 509 of the superintendency report released by the TLC on April 10th, 2024. It's not the current TBDD. It removes the changes some responsibilities to reflect the fact that most presiding elders are volunteers who serve local churches rather than full-time employees of the conference. So this is another thing that has class implications. There are some annual conferences that are rich enough to pay full-time salaries to presiding elders who can make this a full-time job. There are a lot of annual conferences that are not that rich. And so it's not right to expect presiding elders who are doing this as volunteer work on the side beyond their local church setting to perform at the same level as those for whom this is their only job. And that should be self-evident. So this proposal modifies paragraph 509 of the superintendency report released at this date. Presiding elders are addressed in paragraph 507, but the language and numbers used here reflect what is contained in the superintendency report. So I think they're just noting that there was a paragraph change in the most recent Book of Doctrines and Disciplines. So let's look at this. So yeah, it's paragraph 507 here. As an extension of the office of bishop, the presiding elders shall oversee the ministry of the clergy and churches. Okay, yeah, it's the same exact words. I think they're just noting it's a change in the paragraph. In communities to the district to which they are appointed, the presiding elder is the acting administrator of any pastoral charge in which a pastoral vacancy may develop or where no pastor is appointed. The presiding elder has the following specific responsibilities. So only the sections with proposed changes are included in this petition. So it removed point 5, develop an effective system for recruitment of candidates for ministry within the functioning system developed by the annual conference. Well, wait. Okay, so instead of developing an effective system, it supports the work of recruiting candidates for ordained ministry within functioning system developed by the annual conference board of ministry. So it's no longer their direct responsibility. The board of ministry is now responsible for it, although they tie in. Point 8, maintain regular contact with the clergy and churches in their district for counsel and supervision, which may include written or electronic reports. Hey, I'll come up in a minute, baby. My daughter wants me to come up and hang out with her. From each appointed clergy or assigned layperson on their continuing education, spiritual practices, current ministry work, and goals for future ministry. This actually adds more onto their plate by mandating that they are in touch with the churches. Although to do the job well, you have to do this. Point 9, facilitate the proper maintenance of the appropriate records for all persons appointed. So that's just, they don't have to be the direct one doing it. They just have to get somebody to do it. 10, facilitate the proper maintenance for the appropriate records dealing with property, endowments, and other tangible assets of the district. And of course, this is not as important as before because we have no trust clause. Oh, and then they have an additional rationale. Candidacy recruitment systems are better within the board of ministry and should be run at the conference level, not the district level. Presiding elders have a role to play in the process, but should not be the person to develop and administer the process. Yeah. And then on 509.8, 3 changes are included here. Presiding elders have a responsibility to counsel and supervise the churches, not just the clergy. That's true. Presiding elders cannot adequately evaluate the clergy persons within their districts, since those who serve local churches themselves are rarely able to be present in another church on a Sunday morning. Oh, so they need to have that connection with the churches. And 3, making optional the list of items requested from the pastors under their supervision allows the cabinet or individual presiding elders to determine the best way to counsel and supervise clergy in their local context. Oh, I didn't get that they made that optional. Okay, if they say so. And then that last one, 509.9, this is not something that presiding elders must personally do, but it's something they should facilitate. Same on 509.10. That was with maintaining records. Do I have any problem with any of this? I don't think so. I think it all makes sense. Petition 88 makes sense to me. Does it make sense to you guys? Matt says, wait, I changed my mind on that. It was confusing. Yes, I would vote for 86. Smaller nominating committee. Okay. Then I anticipated what the issue was. Okay. Great minds, right? All right. Well, it's 8:24. I like to wrap up in 6 minutes, and and I also like to pay attention just to locals people and how they're processing stuff. So at this point, I transition over to locals. If you want to be a part of that community, you can go to the page that is listed here. Nope. Here. All right.